Hello, this is Bryce with Merships Global Association here in Lausanne, Switzerland. Today, I'm going to share with you my leadership perspective. We have so many courageous leaders in this organization, and today I want to share with you about just one. This is Françoise Andre. For those of you who don't know her, she's the one in the middle in the pink. She is an honest, visionary, inspirational board member, international board member, who can connect with just about anyone at any culture, any socioeconomic society level. Francoise balances wise professional board governance and compassionate and sincere friendship. She also came up with our recent MSGA departmental motto, listen, understand, and deliver. Francoise does not speak a lot, but when she does, people listen. When she speaks out, it is relevant for the moment and situation, and sometimes it is timeless. I want to tell you today about one of the things that she spoke about that was timeless. It was a devotional that she gave to the International Board over 6 years ago. Courageous leaders are strong and driven, but that does not mean that they occasionally feel a bit overwhelmed. The beauty of the Bible is that it gives us so many examples of men and women who must have felt just this way. Noah, let's begin with him. How overwhelmed he must have felt when he was told to build a ship the size of the Africa Mercy, give or take a meter or two, in his backyard, and what's more, thousands of miles from the sea. And then there's David, having to face Goliath. There's Esther, risking her life to address the king. Daniel, having to face the lions. And what about Moses? Stuttering while he's addressing the Pharaoh. And then he had to lead a really tough group of people for over 40 years. Did all these people have it all together? I think we like to paint a really nice picture of our biblical heroes of old, that they had no doubts, no fears. They went out there, they conquered the land, they followed God. But in reality, were there times that they had doubts? Were there times where they felt overwhelmed? David, when he was standing there out in the battlefield, did he look down and think, look at his stones, is this really going to work? Or Esther, she's walking through the doorway into the chambers of the king. Did I really hear God correctly? Am I supposed to be here? Daniel, is this the end? And I am sure that Moses several times thought to himself, or maybe even said, what did I get myself into? I believe the Bible has some keys for us as leaders to deal with the occasional feelings of being overwhelmed. Let's look at 1 Kings. Elijah called to the widow and asked, would you bring me a little water in a jar so that I may have a drink? And she was about to go and get it, and he called, and bring me, please, a piece of bread. Sir, I assure you, as your God lives, she replied, I do not have any bread. Only a handful of flour in a jar and a little oil in a jug. I am gathering a few sticks to take home to make a meal for myself and my son so that we may eat and die. Well, what about the story in John? Jesus looked up. He saw a great crowd coming towards him. So he says to Philip, hey, where should we buy bread for all these people to eat? Now, Jesus asked this only because he wanted to test him, because he already knew what he was going to do. But Philip answered, Jesus, 8 months' wages would not buy enough bread for each one to even have a small bite. Well, Andrew jumps in and says, hey, check this out. We have a boy here that has 5 loaves and 2 fishes. There's plenty of grass in that place, and the men all sat down. And there were about 5,000 men. How overwhelmed the disciples must have felt when Jesus told them, great, take those loaves and fishes and go feed the 5,000. If you count the women and children, we're probably talking about 15,000 people. And what about the story in Mark of the widow with the 2 coins? It says Jesus sat down opposite the place where the offerings were being put, and he watched the crowds putting their offerings in the temple treasury. Many rich people threw in large amounts, but a poor woman came and put in 2 small copper coins worth a fraction of a penny. Reflecting on these stories, it came to mind that there is likely another definition of being overwhelmed. We can be overwhelmed by beauty, wonder, joy, and awe. Let's revisit these 3 examples and see what happens when we put our trust in God. And you know, God has a very different system of mathematics. The story of the widow. Now, we are truly overwhelmed by what happened when the Lord takes over and we put our trust in him. Let's look at the math. If you take one widow and you add 1 loaf and you multiply it by Jehovah Jireh, it equals 1 loaf a day for 2 people during 365 days through a famine that lasted 3 years. Ingredients for 1 loaf and trust in God produced 2,190 loaves. The feeding of the 5,000. Let's do the math. You take 1 boy plus 5 loaves plus 2 fishes, and you mix in Jesus, you get food for 5,000 men, plus the women and children. And then you have 12 basketfuls left over. That likely equals over 75,000 loaves and 30,000 fish. The widow's mite. I like to imagine that Jesus probably went to her afterwards and just thanked her and encouraged her. But the Bible does say that Jesus went and spoke to his disciples. He said, "Truly I tell you, this poor widow has put more in the treasury than all the others. They gave out of their wealth, but she gave out of her poverty and put in everything, all that she had to live on." Well, he went and spoke to the disciples, but then after that, Jesus left, ascended up into heaven. Well, what happened to the widow in her story? It's God's math. 1 widow plus 2 coins multiplied by Jesus has created 200 years of inspirational sacrificial giving. Her story is still told today. All right, you might say, well, that was biblical times. What does it have to do with us and here today in 2022? Well, let's look at a few of the examples of mercy ships and where we have seen such incredible miracles, awesome transformation, things that are overwhelming. When Francoise told the story, she shared about her time of visiting the Good Samaritan back in the beginning days, a few years ago. Through the obedience of one couple, Don and Dion, who listened and followed God's calling, and through sweat, hard work, and probably a lot of tears, the movement has grown to mobilize thousands of volunteers from all nations. And we're still growing. Soon we'll have 2 ships serving in full capacity in Africa, which means 3,000 volunteers a year. We need a programmatic vision and plan that far exceeds the tools we have. We need the donations and gifts in kind to keep the work going. Standing on the promises of God and the miraculous events that we have seen happen in mercy ships in the last couple of years, I believe that we will be overwhelmed with joy and thanksgiving by what we are able to achieve with our obedience to God's calling to bring hope and healing to those who need it most. Being realistic, we will be facing a lot of hard issues and a lot of decisions to make. We need to be looking at our plans. We need to listen to our staff. We need to look for the needs of recruiting thousands of volunteers in this current situation in the world, which is not easy. We need to solve the problems of coordinating our efforts together around the world. We need to look at our plans for running 2 ships and making sure that works well. And at the same time, involvement with the Dakar Declaration and building capacity across Africa. There's also the challenge of raising money right now in an economic downturn worldwide. The list goes on and on. I know, I think many of us, including me, can sometimes feel overwhelmed by the mammoth size of what is ahead of us. It's too big, it's too ambitious, Am I crazy? Are we crazy for doing this? How are we ever going to make it happen? One thing is certain. God has been and is always faithful when we put our trust in him. Like the widow in her last meal, like the young boy who gave his lunch, like that amazing woman who offered the last 2 pennies that she had. There are so many out there that are counting on us to use kingdom mathematics, to go far beyond what we could accomplish by our own strength. For them, let's be overwhelmed together. Thank you.